My name is Julie Madden. I'm on staff here at St. John's, and it is my pleasure to welcome you wherever you are on your journey. This Lent, we are focusing on encounters and the power of encounters to change our lives. And today, our guest speaker is Mindy Ahler. Mindy is co-director of Cool Planet, and she is the regional coordinator for Citizens Climate Lobby. Mindy will be telling a story of encounters that absolutely changed her vision, her perception of the world. And I want to say that when she came back after this mission, she met with our eco-spirits, and we were prepared to hear some pretty dire news from Mindy, and the hope that was running through her was something we knew that all of us had to hear. Mindy has been a leader in our sister parish ministry since its beginning 23 years ago, a leader with our eco-spirits, and no one incorporates and integrates the values of her faith, the values of her humanity in her work and in her life, like our own Mindy Ahler. Please welcome her.
Good morning. I'm not exactly sure when I set the goal for myself to bike across the country before I was 50. It was sometime after falling in love with long-distance cycling in 2006 when I joined Team Oz on the Red Ribbon Ride. And possibly it was on one of the self-supported bike tours that I did after that. It was probably when, as a 40-year-old, I joined a group of 18 to 25-year-olds for about 1,100 miles of their cross-country journey called the Trek to Re-Energize America, a trip where I learned a lot about letting go and trusting things would work out even if we didn't have an exact plan. But I needed a reason for biking across the country, because each long-distance trip that I've done has been a fundraiser for something I cared about: AIDS and AIDS care organizations, sister parish, the environment. When my friend Jerry Yance came up with the concept of low carbon crossings, as my jersey says, combining community conversations on climate change with demonstrating the bike as a great low carbon way to travel, I knew I had my reason for crossing the country. Climate solutions is something that I'm very passionate about and that I've dedicated my full-time work to. And it was clear to me that we needed more conversations about this and ways to motivate people to action. Of course, there's never a good time to do these things. I started doing some calculations on how long and how far it would be to complete such a journey. And excuses as to why it wasn't possible were easy to find. But I had a personal goal, and now I had a reason, and most importantly, I had a calling deep in my heart that this was the right thing to do and the right time to do it. I started with a public commitment about a year in advance to a group of Citizens Climate Lobby volunteers who I was betting would help me, and they did. And being a person who values keeping my word, I now had to make it happen. The plan eventually emerged to complete the journey on November 13th, 2016 in Washington, D.C., so I could join with other Citizens Climate Lobby volunteers and have a bigger impact in our lobbying as they were planning a training and lobby days on November 14th and 15th. So calculating backwards from there at about 50 to 70 miles a day for about 4,000 miles, set the start date 11 weeks earlier on August 27th in Seaside, Oregon. And here's where grace came in. Once I made the commitment, it felt as if God and the universe conspired to help me. I trusted that it was God's plan and began to see the help coming my way. So many volunteers stepped up to help make it happen. I wanted a partner on the journey, and everyone that I asked declined. I didn't know how this was going to work out, but I knew it was the right thing, so I just kept planning. And in June, just 2 months before I was about to depart, I met 23-year-old Ryan Hall in Decorah, Iowa, because I chose just the right place to go have lunch, and my partner Paul was wearing just the right t-shirt to identify us, and Ryan was open to being called in a different direction. We never biked together until the day before we left on the train for Portland with a little test ride. And his only long-distance biking experience was RAGBRAI, the bike ride across Iowa in July. But the day I met him, Ryan talked about being from outside Detroit and that he was gaining the skills to go back to Detroit and help solve problems there. This spoke to me of his integrity, his passion, and his thirst for justice, and that was all that I needed to know. Ryan turned out to be exactly the partner I needed. His laid-back personality was a good balance to my anxious worry. And his youthful perspective added another dimension to the conversations we had along the way, both privately and with others. My biggest takeaway from the trip was the overwhelming generosity and kindness of people everywhere. Many people took us in, gave us a bed, fed us. There were those who gave us directions and suggested better bike routes, and others who picked us up when we were behind schedule or facing bad weather. Countless people stopped by the side of the road to ask if we were okay or if we needed anything. There were so many encounters of God in the journey. And of course, there are tons of stories I'd like to share with you, but for the sake of time, I've picked just a few. And I invite you to join us at 12:30 in the upper room to see some pictures, hear more stories, and engage in more climate action. Our toughest weather day was crossing Rogers Pass in Montana, where we encountered rain, sleet, and then snow. So cold and wet, we arrived in Sims, Montana, seeking the restaurant, the bar, and the campground that were listed on our map, only to be told that none of them existed in the town anymore. But there's a football game over at the high school. You could see if someone there wants to help you. And there we were introduced to Dave, who turned out to be the superintendent of schools and was known to let bikers sleep overnight in the high school when there was bad weather. He talked to us a little bit and then invited us to come stay at his house. Threw our bikes in the back of his pickup. His two kids had recently gone off to college, so we could sleep in their beds. And we experienced the simple but treasured gifts of warm showers, warm beds, and a heater to dry out our stuff before riding on the next day. And the trust of a stranger who was willing to offer these things. Simple generosity was also shown the day we talked to 3 10 to 12-year-old girls on our lunch break at a park in the Midwest. After asking us lots of questions and learning what we were doing, the conversation ended with one of them pulling $2 out of her pocket, and she handed one to me and one to Ryan, and she said, "I want to make a donation." I looked at her and I said, "These are the $2 you just told us you had earned carrying the groceries home on your bike, aren't they?" She nodded, smiled, and ran off with her friends. And I carried that dollar in the top of my bag for the rest of the trip to remind me of her simple yet profound gesture. Not all of our conversations were easy. We stopped at a convenience store in Indiana where new gas pumps were being installed. And reading our jerseys, we say low carbon crossings on the front, and on the back it says cycling towards climate solutions. It was pretty obvious what we were doing. The workers started to tease us and laugh a little bit. We just took it in good fun, and we laughed along, recognizing the irony of this encounter. And after chatting a bit, one of them said to me, you really believe in this stuff, don't you? I'm like, "Yes, I do." "Well, I have to admire your conviction." And he kind of wandered off, muttering, "You people are crazy." But just before we left, we were approached by Todd, who's the owner of this company that installs gas pumps, a business completely dependent on fossil fuels. He handed us his card and he said, "I believe we're on this earth to take care of each other, so if you need anything, give me a call." And a few hours later, as it turned out, our lodging fell through for the night, and we nervously gave him a call, wondering if he really meant what he said. He did. He put us up for the night in an apartment attached to his business and stayed for a couple hours to talk with us. We didn't agree on climate change being a problem that we needed to address, but we respectfully disagreed and found other common values, like caring for our fellow human beings, and that our wild spaces need to be protected for future generations to enjoy as we do. This wasn't the only conversation we had along the way with people who didn't feel the same way we did about climate change. But in each case, we had respectful, honest conversations that eventually uncovered other common values, like caring for the environment and concern for future generations. I'm grateful to Citizens Climate Lobby for the training and practice in building respectful relationships, even with people that I don't always agree with, because those skills proved to be important and very useful on this trip. The importance of what we were doing really struck me when we entered Nebraska. There we met Kathy, who told us, "I'm really concerned about climate change, but nobody else in Nebraska is." In the same restaurant, we met Moses, who said, "I'm really concerned about climate change, but nobody else in Nebraska is." "That's funny, the woman over there is just as concerned as you are." And a little ways down the road, we met Carl, who says, "I'm concerned about climate change, but nobody else in Nebraska is." And this is when it really struck me that in the absence of public conversations about climate change, people can feel very isolated in their concern. So we need to make it normal to talk about climate change and encourage people to have these conversations with their neighbors. And that the media hits that we were getting, we had about 40 media hits between television, radio, and newspapers that reached far beyond anyone that we could talk to personally. And those help in normalizing that conversation and contributing to that public conversation about climate change and really are important. So on our journey, we touched 14 states in about 3,750 some miles in 79 days with about 10 days off. And I did it all on a 30-year-old Trek bicycle that I inherited from my mom. We saw breathtaking beauty in Idaho and Montana and other states. We saw lots of corn and soybeans through the Midwest and the lovely rolling hills of Pennsylvania. We had 34 community conversations and hundreds of informal conversations along the way. And we collected nearly 400 postcards that were handwritten to our members of Congress that we delivered with the help of other Citizens Climate Lobby volunteers when we reached DC and were lobbying for climate action. We raised just over $15,000 in cash and in-kind donations, and that's not counting all the people that gave us free food and free lodging. And we had under $5,000 in expenses that included our train transportation, some minor bike repairs, and lots of groceries. The balance goes towards supporting the ongoing climate solutions work through Cool Planet and Citizens Climate Lobby. Since returning home, my athletic pursuits have shifted to cross-country skiing and outreach to skiers in this snow-starved winter, though I'm cheering for snow today. Because this has made climate change very real for a lot of skiers this year. 2 major cross-country ski events were impacted by the lack of snow in February. The Berkey in Wisconsin was canceled, and the city of Lake Slope was reduced to a 5K loop in Worth Park on artificial snow. We had booths at these 2 events, and we gathered over 700 letters to our members of Congress calling for action on climate change. People really are hungry to get involved. And you can write your own letter at our table in the Egan room or come to the 12:30 presentation in the upper room. And you can encourage your member of Congress to join the bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus that already has 15 Republicans and 15 Democrats talking about solutions to climate change in our country. We'll also talk at 12:30 about more actions that you can get involved with. But most importantly, talk about climate solutions. To your friends, to your neighbors, to your family. And if you have someone that doesn't share your concern, look for other common values and try to build respectful conversation on those values. I ended my bike journey 1 week after the election, filled with hope that in this experience, this country is filled with good people that are taking care of each other and helping out. I had met people who wanted to engage in respectful conversation on issues of importance to explore what others thought. I met people who felt left behind by our national policies and wanted to change, not because they wished anyone ill, but because they thought different might be something better. I met lots of people who were concerned about climate change and ready to take action. I came home knowing there is nothing wrong with this country. It's already great when we work together. Thank you.